So that's the hope, is we can get to that. Yeah. Great, welcome everybody.
Get H127 out tomorrow.
No, hopefully the housing bill either tomorrow or the next day.
Would they be going to conference?
It will be going to SNRE because if there is any additional appeals language, it'll go to SNRE and they may have an amendment they want to add.
But our housing bill, where is that?
Our housing bill is in Ways and Means right now.
Okay.
Welcome. Welcome. It is Tuesday, May 6th, and you're in Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs, and we are going to be addressing the repeal of the sunset on take-to-go drinks, which is embodied in H339. And Tucker, it's yours. We are, I think, really just ready. I think we all pretty much understand what it involves, that there have not been consequences in any of the reporting. There have been, I think there was one incident that was very modest, but we have, from what I can understand, no major concerns from this committee. I think we're all sort of, at least some of us are a little apprehensive about putting this into law for forever, but committee, what are your thoughts on this repeal?
I'm fine with it.
Repeal until first fatal accident.
That's one way to look at it. There you go.
Okay, sure.
I've long supported.
Yes, I know. Yeah, you're
ending prohibition. So.
right. David?
Since there's no compelling data that it affected public safety, and I'll support the bill.
Yeah, and we asked for that. When we passed this bill, we asked for that data, and there was no compelling data. So, clerk, I would I'd entertain a motion on, I think you have the sheet.
I do have the sheet.
Oh,
I'd entertain a motion
I
on
move.
passing out H339 positively.
I move that.
Okay, ready to vote, Madam Chair?
Absolutely.
Okay, Senator Brock,
Yes.
Sure.
You can note the lament in his voice.
of course. I can't record that. Somehow there's not a separate block for
I'm trying to
lament.
record these sessions.
Senator Chinden.
Yes.
That was enthusiastic.
Senator Rom Hinsdale.
Yes.
Senator Weeks.
Yeah,
Yes. Senator Clarkson.
a reluctant yes.
We need emoticons.
So it's 5-0-0.
Real mad lips there.
Anybody wildly excited about reporting this? I have often done liquor and lottery, and
You have a good track record of getting.
He's really, people, they just think, oh, Tom's reporting it. It's nothing
That's right,
controversial.
yeah, as opposed to me.
Yeah.
And then it becomes contentious and it goes on Facebook.
Did it go on Facebook?
or to follow on that, not here or on,
I would
perhaps in public.
be glad to, unless you'd like to start.
Absolutely. A simple, happy to have you do it. While we're talking about Thomas Chittenden, unpaid leave is in approach. There was a de minimis.
They invited me
Effect.
at 2 p.m. and I believe it's because it affects the BSCA or monthly employees. And that's
Right. Tucker, thank you very much.
Thank you. That was
Perhaps the
walkthrough.
speediest vote we will take this session. And we will welcome early because she's here early and we give her big points for that. Thank you, Representative Elizabeth Burrows. Please come and join us. And I would let us remind ourselves where we are.
Good morning.
Good morning, Elizabeth.
Good morning.
We are here to discuss section 4 of H479, which we understand you are the chief architect of. And we have, as you know, discussed having this incorporated into another study, which we thought was related, but it seems that that is impractical. And so would you be kind enough to sell us on section 4?
Okay. For the record, my My name is Elizabeth Burrows, and I represent Windsor One, which is Heartland, West Windsor, and Windsor. For the last couple of years, I've been 2 years ago, in the beginning of the session, I heard, or we heard a lot of data about the demographics of our homeless population in Vermont. And one of the statistics that stuck in my ear was that more than 80% of our homeless population has a physical disability. And
More than 80%.
And so I spent last biennium, really trying to make sure that housing for people with disabilities was sprinkled into whatever housing the state decided to put money towards, not only because of our homeless population, but also because of our aging demographics. So everybody at some point will need to have accessible housing. So last biennium, we put some money into VHIP for updating, along with the other projects in VHIP, for updating housing to become accessible. We also put money towards, there was a VHFA project that we also put money towards. And when I attended the housing conference in October, I asked both VHFA and VHIP their representatives whether they had, what the uptake was for those two programs. And they said 0. And so I asked why, and it turned out, actually the conversation with VHFA had started before the end of the session. When I asked both of them what was up, they said it was because as a state, we don't have defined any of what universal, sorry, to back up just a little bit. What it was with VHFA was that I wanted to have codified for state law the same requirements that HUD has for using HUD funding, which is the requirement for universal design. And while VHFA already uses that in policy, I just wanted to make sure that it was codified in statute so that it would be permanent, so that we could have it everywhere.
So help us all understand, it already is required by HUD.
Yeah.
That any housing project that uses federal money or uses, which is almost all of our affordable housing projects, use a universal design standard.
Yep. But we, as a state,
As of when?
I don't know.
So
I really
why
don't
have
know.
we not, are we currently doing that in Vermont?
In theory, yes.
So in the
For
project,
federal
when I was,
projects, yes. But we don't have defined what visitability is, which is where a person with a disability is able to enter a dwelling. We don't have defined what features of accessibility we choose for the state of Vermont. We don't have defined what features of universal design. I think there are some 170 possibilities there. We just need to decide as a state what exactly we want. And so when I went back and forth with both of these organizations about building more accessible housing, this is what they came back with. What exactly do you want? And so I worked with VHFA at the end of last session, the beginning of this session, to come up with this study. And part of the reason for this study is one, so it wouldn't be the reason that I'm sorry to be so scattered. The reason that it should be a standalone committee is that it doesn't define codes, building codes. It actually is the precursor to defining building codes. We can't really, once we have this down, then we can define building codes. But also, part of the reason that I asked for the study committee to be as, for the study committee to be as vague as it is.
Yeah, it's way big.
It is. But one of my purposes is to make, if you look through the members of it, to make every stakeholder in building and real estate and everybody else involved with getting somebody into a house to have sort of like experiential learning, to have them be part of the process so they could see how important it is, how important these features are, so the real estate people could see that it's actually a profit center versus a loss center, because we often hear that it costs too much and is it worth it? Actually, it's doesn't cost as much as people think, and it actually adds value to a home, particularly in Vermont. And so to have people from all aspects of not just building, but also inspection and real estate and everybody else actually take part in this project. I don't believe, because it's not controversial and it's dealing with a finite list of options or inventory. I don't think it will, even though it's a big task force, I don't think it'll take that many meetings to get it done, because, and to get a report written to bring to the legislature next year to.
Well, I guess I'm a little puzzled.
Yeah.
If it's already required by HUD, why haven't we incorporated it?
We have, and, but
So
that's
why do
not
we
the-
need the task force? If we've already incorporated these standards from HUD that are required if we're going to get federal funding, why do we still need to do this?
because it's not the only, that's for universal design. It's not for ADA compliance or any of those levels. It's not for defining what actually is accessible or visitable or adaptable. Those all come from a whole host of definitions that we have to choose from for our state. And while buildings do adhere to the HUD standards, we don't have a defined list of characteristics for our state.
Can you give us an example so we can think about it in concrete terms of what the choices might be for a given part of a building or construction project?
Well, visitability means being able to get inside the building if you require an assistive device, right? But visitability could look completely differently for it does, according to all of the standards out there. It looks differently for a single family home versus an apartment building. And it could mean ramps going in, it could require elevators, it could mean parking, it could have all these different things. We just don't have defined what we want. It could mean roll-in showers, it could mean and also, and I keep going back to the example of the building in Windsor.
Yes, I was gonna say, why don't you share, because you shared with me, we were at the governor's visit for a day in Windsor County, and we, at that point, Elizabeth and I were at the sort of opening, in a way, at least the reviewing and going and visiting Windsor in Maine, or Central in Maine.
State and Maine.
State Maine. And Elizabeth, you pointed out that it was not, even though this was used HUD money, uses federal money, it was not universal design.
Well, no, I said that it's not ADA compliant, and so then the question was whether it was adaptable or, or accessible, or what, and you asked, what would make it, what would
Yeah,
make
what
it
would,
accessible? And I said, if you were sitting in a chair in the kitchen, if you could think about whether you could reach the things in the cupboards, or whether, you know, what kind of special accommodations you would need. So that we then went to all of the accessible units have roll-in showers, but they don't necessarily have lowered cabinets or counter spaces, and so it varies. In other words, there is no minimum definition of what accessibility is.
and is that incorporated in universal design?
Yeah.
I think this committee has two concerns. One, some members are not big fans of task forces. And do we need a task force to accomplish this? How can we accomplish it otherwise? We have two task forces now in this bill. We have the, unless you, developmentally disabled task force and the universal design task force. Is there any way those could be combined in terms of looking fully at both how we incorporate universal design and at the same time how we do thoughtful planning on building and establishing more housing for the developmentally disabled?
I personally don't think so. I think the only thing that links those two things together is disability. And further, I really deeply feel that this task force, rather than having, you know, a couple people go into a room to decide what the minimum standards are going to be, it needs to have people with lived experience as part of choosing it. If we're going to prioritize from a list of 170 different things, we need somebody who's actually going to have to live with the consequences to be there to help
So
in that
you
choice.
feel we need both task forces, and we're gonna obviously hear from others, and that this really needs to be done before we do the statewide building code standards.
Yeah.
Yeah, but which, as you know, they're behind on.
Yeah.
So if this work could be done first, that would be great.
If this work could be done first, then we can roll into the statewide codes, building codes.
Okay, committee,
Next session, maybe, hopefully.
yeah, wouldn't that be great?
So, I mean, as sympathetic as I am to all of this, I used to be the accessibility ADA designee for Burlington. You know, we worked on making North Beach accessible. We got a VCIL award for our work. We worked on a universal design playground. Like, I just want to share that before I say that I not only am not a big fan of study committees right now, but I can't see, I don't even like the other study if it makes you feel better, and won't support that, because right now we need to bring down the cost of housing. And the way I see us doing that while honoring this idea is to give a density bonus for accessible properties. They need a density bonus if they're going to make the elevator bigger to accommodate a stretcher. They need a density bonus if they're going to create an accessible lobby or have the hallways be very wide and the doorways be very wide. So for me, I don't know if Senator Clarkson and Senator Brock feel differently, but I feel like I've been here long enough to see study committees just spend money that we frankly don't have right now. I mean, $15,000 is money that could house someone. And we are studying things that we know the problem is that communities aren't allowing a lot of multifamily housing, and multifamily housing often by its nature is accessible. Habitat for Humanity wants to do these projects that are fully accessible. They get stymied all the time. So I just worry that we're avoiding the real work with study committees. That's why I don't like them.
But I would say that we can't do any of it, we can't fund any of it without deciding what we're funding. And that zero, the other statistic from, my first term on general housing was 0.04% of our available housing is accessible. So that means that people who have Section 8 vouchers, who have a disability,
Mm-hmm.
are going through over and over and over again, because in order to use the Section 8 housing and with a disability, they have to have certification that it's
Right.
accessible.
Right, so we just went through this with the energy building codes, because if you make new builds that are really high efficiency, they meet all these codes and have all the bells and whistles, people can't afford them. And so then they buy a really low quality mobile home that's very drafty and has very poor energy efficiency, because they can't afford this nice new home. Most of these new builds that are accessible and net zero are upwards of $800,000. They're all coming in our neck of the woods, and they're great for, seniors and large families that have significant needs. But they are going up and up in price the more things we add to them, without the requisite density that allows them to lower the cost per unit. So we're trying to solve the same problem, but what we are doing is creating a situation where people are living in very substandard housing, because there's no rental vacancy and there's no housing that they can afford to buy once we put all these requirements on it.
So are you saying that it's better to not to have people with disabilities in dwellings that they can't get to or get around or get out of?
I'm saying that I think there's a much better way to approach this conversation and actually get housing built than to study this.
How?
I mentioned giving a density bonus to projects and reducing their permit requirements if they're building fully ADA accessible housing.
But we don't yet have that density.
Every
bonus, right?
community has that. Like, most communities define that for themselves. Burlington and South Burlington have a different elevator requirement than other places because we have taller buildings. These standards do exist. The idea of having multiple committees doing code work, I find problematic right now, because they're usually not talking to each other, and this is a lot for the actual developers of housing to deal with at the end.
Which is why we had Scott come in and who is chairing the code.
Okay, but we also
work at
have
the
like a disability working group. We have other groups that could do this work.
My understanding is from your testimony is that the universal design the whole purpose of this is to save money down the line when something may have to be adapted. So that we have, it may cost more. What I think your point is, it will cost more initially to build, is that. And I think Polly's gonna testify to this, so we should get Polly up as well. But the question.
The design itself does not actually cost significantly more. It's wider, it's not wider doorways. It is a design that includes the ability to widen it if you need it.
Is this all new build?
Yeah.
Okay, and it's all billed regardless of federal dollars? It's just projects with federal dollars?
It currently, federal money requires a percentage of the building include universal design, but we don't have anything in our state. That's the problem. So it really was belts and suspenders to think about having because VHFA already does it in practice. It was really belts and suspenders, making sure that it is in statute.
So you're only talking about new build that is a federally funded project?
And state funding. For federal funding, it already exists.
Yeah.
So for
what kind of state funding?
for example, VHIP, we added a category of $70,000 for landlords that wanted to update, dwellings to be accessible.
Yeah.
Or create dwelling units to be accessible for infirmed or whoever. And I was told that they couldn't do it because we don't have any kind of designated rules or codes about it.
Right, so that we
Who said
hadn't
that?
incorporated in the statute, the universal
Who from VHIP said that?
design
Chad Simmons and Nora Collins.
Okay.
of VHFA.
I'm sorry, from VHIP, it was Sean.
Sean Gilpin.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is really putting in statute what is already law. That's why I'm a little, so that is what this is,
That's the goal, yeah.
right? And hopefully in terms of chicken and egg, this would be set and then we would be doing the standardized building code and that would incorporate this.
Yeah.
Okay, the work of Scott's committee. Great, thank you. We have two other people to hear from on this. So, because we now have two study committees working at the development of the lane disabled, which you think is very separate, and we'll do the universal design separately. Okay, great. Thank you, Elizabeth. Any other questions for Elizabeth? Okay, thanks very much. Are you able to stay with us while we?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Unless the roll call.
Yeah, great. Terrific. Polly, would you be kind enough to join us?
Changing up the order.
That's okay.
For the record, Polly Major, I'm the policy director for the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And I think I just want to respond to some of the committee's questions that came up in the last conversation. So I understand that the question at hand is whether to combine, if you choose to have study committees, whether to combine the Physical Accessibility Universal Design Study Committee with the study committee that's looking at how does the state meet its needs for persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
And it's just one question. I mean, they mean, it sounds like they're not necessarily.
I would say from our perspective, they're two very distinct questions. One is the Universal Design Study Committee is dealing with physical accessibility, architectural design. How do we need to, what kind of codes do we need to have in place to ensure that someone with a physical disability can live in more of the housing in the state? So that's a very architectural question. The other question about how do we provide enough housing to meet the needs of the intellectual and disabilities community is a question that deals much more with integration into services and how does the housing and the servants' needs intersect to create homes where this population can live. I think combining them into one study would be less efficient actually than keeping them separate, because you're going to have different people answering those questions. You'd have to have a larger study committee. It would be it would essentially be a bifurcated product with half looking at architecture and half looking at the service sector. So we wouldn't recommend moving forward and combining those.
Thank you. So talk to us about universal design, because you're the one who is, the HCB is primarily building affordable housing that is, would be incorporating HUD requirements. Tell us what you would do now and how this would be helpful to have this universal design.
And I'm going to start with a disclaimer that I am not an architect, and so I'm not steeped in the architectural details of this conversation. I can say as kind of big picture, VHCB and VHFA collaborate on a design standard to make it more efficient to use our resources together or separately. And part of that is a universal design policy that VHFA led that we adopted with them. And that policy says that homes should, it provides a checklist to work towards, or for buildings to include, to be defined as being under universal design standards. And what it says as a definition for universal design is an approach to design that works to ensure products and buildings can be used virtually by everyone, regardless of their level of ability or disability. We then go a step further when we use federal funds in projects to be compliant with the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. That has a higher standard of accessibility than just universal design. And so that's, and that says that highest standard of accessibility, a fully accessible apartment, that needs to apply to 5% of the homes funded with federal funding. It's an acknowledgement that physical disability is, there's a broad range of physical disabilities. Not everybody needs to live in an apartment to that highest level of accessibility. And so in balancing cost and design considerations versus accessibility, we're looking at having a range that flows through incorporating universal design standards. There's not a full set definition of universal design. How do you meet that? That's part of the questions subcommittee. So you have that, you have accessible and adaptable within Vermont's access standards, and then you have those homes that are going to be fully accessible. So Central and Maine has federal funding. It meets the ADA requirement of having those fully accessible units. I believe it's 3 of them. And then the rest are to a adaptable or visitability standard. So really looking at fully meeting those requirements. I will say that the Universal Design Study Committee has a broader charge than the state funds, which already require universal design elements, and that it is to look at universal design standards for all residential buildings. When we're talking about the challenge of, I think we focus so much on the publicly subsidized buildings because those are the easiest levers for us to pull. But when we're looking at where someone's really accessing housing in the market, it is the broader market that doesn't have these federal or state dollars touching it. And so
85% of our rentals are not in the affordable housing space.
and these are being accessed by people exiting homelessness, by people with vouchers. So having accessibility is really important for solving this problem that people can't function in the homes available to them. But that the solution is inclusive of the whole housing market, not just of the state subsidized.
And that's
housing
what
market.
this task force looks at,
It is.
weighing whether to apply it to all and what the cost implications are to
That
that.
may be in here as well. I'm not sure on that piece, but I think what this is looking at is an important question of what do we want to see in terms of universal design? What is a reasonable definition of that? What's reasonable to ask of builders across the state? And it really does feed into that broader conversation of building codes and having standardized building codes. I think if we look at the energy code conversation, there's a big conversation around compliance, around education, and those are questions that would undoubtedly come up in this study committee. So I think what I would say is a good reason to have this is there are really technical, unanswered questions around how does ADA intersect with Vermont access code requirements, with what is universal design, what is possible in terms of building to universal design. Are there just best practices that people can be educated on? What would that look like? And how to work with the building industry to ensure that what they're building reaches a broader market. So we certainly support exploring these questions further. It's, I think, because we're already implementing this where we can implement it in state and federal funding areas, it's a good candidate, I would say, for a study, because it is looking at those questions about how can we ensure that this works with the private market, that it's not kind of forced on them, that it's going to be helpful.
Randy?
Has anybody else done this in other state?
I am not sure.
Because that's the first step, is whether or not we can copy what somebody else has done instead of reinventing the wheel ourselves.
Well, if HUD is requiring it, I assume it's required everywhere.
Only on the state, on the federally subsidized buildings. What we're looking at is what can we do for, whether there are other states with state building codes and whether those building codes incorporate universal design, and if they do, what are the definitions? That's a
Well, I
great
mean, it's-
question
it's
to
a
answer.
Pretty basic question to ask before we spend a lot of time doing something perhaps someone else has already done. And one of the ways is through NCSL or the CGF or so on. There are organizations that gather what other states have done in the regulatory area.
I assume that's what this study committee would look at, is looking at what the other states are doing.
Question is, could we do that without having a study committee to do it?
I think that would be a
Sounds-
question for the industry partners who are in here, to ask them if it's something that they're looking at doing.
Do you and VHFA have a way to quantify the cost?
Yes, that was.
I think that would,
Like even the basic cost? Obviously, universal design is so subjective.
But I also think that is not part of what the study committee is looking at, is would be looking at the additional costs that it would be at. It says costs and benefits and impacts of adopting universal design
But
for
we-
residential buildings.
So where I struggle with endorsing study committee after study committee is, then why are we here? If we want information about the cost, we should look at it in committee and decide if that makes sense to even move forward with asking the industry to participate in something when they are busy building housing and trying to protect their bottom line so that people who live here can afford to buy a house or live in rental units. Like,
Well, they also have to be able to get into the housing, and so I think, I don't think this does any
I
harm, and
do.
it sounds
I
helpful.
really do want to challenge that. We have a homelessness crisis. We have many people with disabilities who cannot afford a place to live.
Right,
They are about to lose access to motels. So just gazing at the problem of not enough units and how to make them more accessible, with that making them more expensive,
that's
is
the
not
challenge
just
of this.
a benign thought exercise.
But that is what they're looking at. And I think one of the reasons that it sounds like Polly is endorsing this study and that it's a good candidate for a study is precisely that, because if 80% of our homeless population has disabilities, we need to be able to create units that can be down the road adapted. And that's what this is. It's not immediately created to be ADA accessible. It sounds like they're being designed to be adaptable in the future.
yes, I think that's a good summary.
Thomas.
I take your point, Senator Hinsdale, and I do see that density and focusing on enabling more density is the key solution that I believe we are making progress on multiple fronts. I am becoming more of a fan of study committees because what I do see them doing is we only have so much time and so much expertise that this gets the important stakeholders to work these things out, to come up with solutions, then bring it back for further discussion. And I know $15,000 is real money. I'd love $15,000, but relative to the whole budget, I'm not opposed to this only because I do see it as answering questions that we don't have time to answer. But I definitely echo what Senator Hinsdale is saying, is we just need to drive higher density throughout Vermont to address the core problem.
I think one interesting example around density is that Central and Main project that we're discussing here. That could have gone up to 30 units and was required to go down to 25 because of the local. Because even though the local zoning allowed it up to 25, in order to get the permit, the local municipality made it come down to that 25. So even when they're
gone up to 30.
up to 30. So even when density bonus is available, it's not always
The community
allowed to
doesn't
be
always
used.
accept it.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
So more can be, a lot has been done there, and I think we can continue
So-
to push there.
And I think this task force will answer a bunch of the questions we're asking now, which is,
But we could say, if you're meeting HUD building design standards, the density of the project cannot be reduced by local or state zoning. I mean, that would do so much more for people than studying things. That's what makes me upset, is I actually want to help people. And I don't think that's what we do when we gaze at these problems.
I don't think this is gazing at it, this is actively addressing it, and
We already
hopefully coming
have
back to us with answers. Yeah, but they're not fully being incorporated.
Well, then you could incentivize them being incorporated.
I think that's what they will be looking at and hopefully recommending.
I think that, the question here is what incentives does the private market need in
Right.
order to fully
To-
incorporate these?
Which is good, yeah. Any other questions for Polly? Great, thanks. Susan?
These paintings in this room keep going askew, that's.
Vibration.
It would be nice to have a change in artwork because these are starting to like make me feel a little.
I've tried not to straighten the art in the safe house.
That's okay, we have a
Get
vibrating
reputation.
wall here that's in part of our
Great.
property.
So,
So you could buy, just at this point, all these paintings are for sale. If you wanna buy any of them and take them off our walls, you are all welcome.
oh, I had no idea.
Especially.
Okay, for the record, Susan Aronoff, Vermont Developmental Disabilities Council. I am the senior planner and policy analyst, and I'm bearing cookies. Peanut butter. I'll start them on this end.
So far.
And
They
this
won't
is
make
a-
it past the first stage.
I also have, information about the council. We're not off.
So we
before
have the
you.
disability task force. I
So
think we're-
I just wanted to start my testimony with a thank you for including in the Senate version of the plan the group that you're calling a study committee in this discussion so far, but really it's a planning group. It has to create an
Randy.
actionable plan by November 15th, so that in time for the drafting deadline, so that you guys have something to work with next year. We kept that small, that
Yeah.
group lean and mean. We're also gonna be tackling some complicated questions already in it, like how do we
Yeah,
get
so
people
you-
through coordinated entry who will never be homeless because they get stuck in nursing homes. So I would like to second Polly was saying, that group really would not be a good place to
Keep them
then
separate.
squeeze. As for the issue of universal design, I'd just like to back up and kind of pick up on what Senator Ron Hinsdale is saying, which is that the housing crisis in Vermont has not really been well framed as a crisis for people with disabilities who are lacking housing. But when you listen to Brenda Siegel's testimony, and if you talk to my colleague Sarah from the Vermont Center for Independent Living, we can tell you, medically certified or not, so many of the people currently unhoused are people with disabilities. Vermont's housing stock is not really up to the task. Enforcement is not up to the task. I wish Senator Clarkson was here because I was going to talk about the lack of elevator service in the Capitol Plaza. That's where my office is. We had elevators around the eclipse, but really, since the flood of 2 years ago, no elevators. Ditto that for many buildings in Montpelier where people with disabilities live. I just happened to work for the state's disability enforcement office in an inaccessible building. So when Big Hartman talks about more than 50% of the complaints the Human Rights Commission receives in Vermont are from people with disabilities, so much of that is access to public establishments like the Capitol Plaza that should be accessible by law or required there.
Those elevators are still out?
Yes,
Yes,
I
yes.
didn't realize it was still out. I knew.
we just moved our office. Ask BGS what it's like to move those.
So,
Okay, can we also
Yeah.
just recognize, we don't have anyone to fix elevators in Vermont
right, we don't.
because there is no workforce, because there's nowhere to live.
And there's no workforce
It's
to
all
serve the
a bit of
people
a
with
catch, right?
disabilities.
No.
So I was on the enforcement issue. So if you were gonna solve the homelessness of people with disabilities question, I think this legislature has so many urgent places that have need, that know how to fix some problems facing people who are homeless with disabilities, i.e.
So
all
you
those things. So in terms of this particular study and this particular group, I also echo what Senator Hinsdale said in terms of, I think the questions that are being asked are very important questions. I don't know that you need to bring all of these people together. I think if you were to charge, I don't know, I would check with Alex Farrell first, open a forum on the bus, but it's one of our housing entities with this study, they can come back and give you these answers.
right, but we're
I don't
having,
wanna throw Polly under the.
that we're, but your proposal is that we still keep them separate and that we, so,
Yes,
but.
and it's important work. Is it the most important work?
Well, it's important work. All of, anything to do with improving our housing is important work.
Now, this, yes,
So I would,
may I,
I'm
I'd be
not.
happy to answer any
So
other.
that having been said, they did not include your study.
They include us in the study, which we appreciate. So the other thing that I wanted to speak to about why the group was so large, we tried to keep our group small. I think there's benefit to a large group because then no one can say we weren't heard, we didn't have a place at the table, everyone is included. Representative Burrows, I think, really went out of her way. She checked with me many times. She wanted to make sure people with lived experience were included. So I assured her that when Green Mountain Self Advocates is one of the groups, those folks are all lived experience, Center for Independent Living. My group, the majority is by law. I'm just a mercenary, but my council is majority made up of people with disabilities and their family members.
Right.
So
you would
lots
like
of
to
lived
have this,
experience.
your study kept, and if we're gonna do universal design, keep it separate. Thank you.
Thank
That
you,
is
and
terrific.
enjoy this. This is a thank you for all your service. Come to our ice cream social Thursday
These
night.
are really
They're
good.
really good.
These are
Thank
really
you. I was once a
I like
baker.
Oh, my
God.
But anyway, you guys have met with the family members who've come through the building, each of you throughout the session. So this is my sincere thank you. And for Heidi too, who was so.
Andy,
Thank you.
Andrew, would you kind of forget Michael Brady, who's been on the hall? Thank you. So as Mike gathers, so this is a decision point committee on keeping universal design and keeping both task forces in, I think is what we're looking at. I think we heard enough testimony on developmental disabilities before. I feel very strongly that we need to keep that work in. We have 600 people facing that need. And so the question is universal design, and I think that this would help tee us up for next year. I am happy with keeping it in, but I'd love to go in there, Bill, and that's what we have, is H 479.
Most of the same people who need to be at the table for other types of design code. I would support adding, and I've asked to be on that committee because frankly, there hasn't been.
I felt we had pretty strong pushback from that committee and from Scott, and I'd be, that they, I would be happy to have it included because that has to come first. As Elizabeth said, they have to be looking at them in tandem in many ways. So that's why I'd had Scott come in to testify, because I thought that was the natural thing to do, was to incorporate them. But they, as you'll recall from
Who's
Scott's
Scott?
test, Scott Campbell, who chairs it.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I was like, okay, right.
So, and there was a lot of pushback on that, but that doesn't mean we couldn't do it and have it for discussion. David, what were your thoughts?
I'm still listening.
Yeah, so that, they had pushed back on not doing that. And we can have him back.
We can't have him back, right? He's out on medical.
He's, I think,
I don't
available
want
by
to
Zoom.
stress him out, by bringing him back, but if they
He's
are
available by
working,
Zoom.
if they are working at separate purposes and then the building community hears, oh, we have this task force. Do you know how often this happens to builders and renovators that ADA, historic preservation, and energy are all saying different things and giving them different requirements for the same project that sometimes collide with each other? And if we are going to do good housing policy, which frankly should have always been part of the energy code, and I don't think that perspective's been at the table, then we should combine these conversations.
That is why I had invited Scott in, and as you know, he's
It's
been out.
in our
since
charge now.
Right. Let's think about that, and let's turn to brownfields, because we have Tom Kennedy here and Mike O'Grady to tee us up. This language came back to us exactly as we passed the brownfields language. And I don't know what the concerns are that we're addressing, but this language in the House bill is pretty much exactly the same. Mike, could you take us through?
This is Mike O'Grady with Legislative Council. What the House added to or approved in 127 is exactly the language that was voted out by you and is exactly the same as that's in draft 2.1 of your amendment to H 479.
What section?
In your,
Okay, so we have, I believe Heidi put up our places, the draft 2.1 of H 479.
Yes.
section 19 is where it begins. Okay. 37.
Here's, this pages. It's section 19.
Yeah, page 37. I'm literally comparing them to what's in S 127 that Cameron had as draft 4.1 from May 2nd. They are exactly the same.
Right.
So I don't know what else you would like me to say.
It's exactly the same.
Yes, it's exactly the same. We passed it, and I would encourage us to continue to support it. Key work that has to be done before we can redevelop.
So my understanding was, the version in our bill, what am I looking at? The version in our bill was specific to brownfields redevelopment dollars. And the version that went in S 133 to natural resources was all projects are eligible for an alternative compliance path. Is this all projects?
I guess I don't know what's in S 133. I haven't seen language different from this.
So this applies to all projects?
For the management
Yes.
of development soils, yes.
Yes.
So regardless of whether or not it's deemed a brownfield?
Yes.
Or
That's right.
So
this one?
Yeah.
So it has, I mean, designating it a brownfield means that it's a hazardous waste site subject to a soil contamination plan. This management of development soils is also available for that. It doesn't mean that the parcel is in the brownfields program. The brownfields program is a program where liability waiver is issued to the prospective owner of the property if they go through specific steps and develop a plan for
Okay,
the management of the property. This is not that. It could potentially be, but it is not
is
that.
all language about management of development soils in the brownfield section? Is that why it falls under this header brownfield?
I mean, it's falling under, I would have called it development soils.
Oh, okay.
Semicolon brownfields,
Yeah.
it would have, it's a slight distinction, but it is a distinction.
But 10 VSA applies to all development soils,
Yes,
so not just brownfields.
yes, and that's how existing development soils are. It's not just brownfield.
Right,
I mean, you will see that it has to be at a hazardous material site managed pursuant to a corrective action plan or a soil management plan. But that doesn't mean that it's in the brownfields program seeking a release from liability.
so hazardous isn't a different bar than just they've determined that it's more hazardous than the soil around it? Is that,
I mean, there's different ways that soil is determined to be hazardous.
Okay.
Development soils is limited to the presence of three contaminants. It's the arsenic, lead, and polyaromatic, I always get this, PAHs. And that is the only thing that can be managed as development soils when it exceeds either the residential soil value or the commercial soil value for PAHs or arsenic or lead. But if it's something else,
Yeah.
if it's another contaminant, it's not managed as development soils, it's managed as, well, there's a whole rule, the I rule, on how to manage it. And that depends on if it exceeds the soil value, what use it's going to be used for, et cetera, how much property you're talking about. I mean, it's like an 85-page rule on how to manage contamination on a site.
But this applies to all developmental.
This is about development soils, which is just those three contaminants You have to be at a materials management site, you have to have a corrective action plan or soil management plan. It has to be going to a location where the soils are managed in an appropriate way, and it's not going to create a threat to groundwater. You can't disturb it.
It has to be very stable.
It has to be covered. It's managed under an insignificant waste event permit, which arguably A&R already has the authority to issue these. And so this is just formalizing that.
Well, that's why I'm suspicious, because I have been trying to talk to A&R about this, and I don't know why this hasn't been happening. So I don't know if A&R is ready to be in the witness chair, but I'm trying to make sure that this would change the situation on the ground for recent projects. And are there any projects in the last few years that you can point as an example that either would have benefited from this or would not be eligible for this?
So Matt, stay right there. Let's
Sure.
make the conversation. We also have Tom up there.
Sure.
So if
So
you.
for the record, Matt Chapman, I'm the Director of Waste Management Prevention Division with A&R. I mean, so this was written to be as broad as possible to allow as many people, regardless of their status, to take advantage of this regulatory flexibility. So it was not intended, frankly, it was intended to give us the maximum degree of flexibility to manage these soils when they're encountered, regardless of whether you were participating formally in the brownfields program or not.
Right.
Okay.
So, you know, if you're a developer who encounters contamination during your sort of like excavation work and you call the state up and manage it with the state, it opens the door to this authority to allow you to manage it more flexibly than having to have a truck there to just off the country. So, as far as, you know, it's hard to speculate just who would have taken advantage of this, right? Because it does require whoever's doing the development to find a willing participant on the other side to accept the material, right? So it's hard for me to guess where the economics would have worked out, that it makes more sense for me to contract with either another developer who needs some fill, or if there's another nearby project where it makes sense.
That's the language that I thought was in S-133, that it would give more flexibility for a regional site to be designated as a landfill for the purposes of these
There's
services.
already that authority in law.
Okay.
It's called a categorical facility that's already available, but to seek, but only one person has sought it and then pulled their application. So no one's looking to build those. So what A&R is proposing is the use of the insignificant waste event permit to find places where, as Matt said, the receiving site agrees to have the soil there. It doesn't become a long-term collection facility. It's just used for discrete one-time, two-time events for the management of the development soil.
And you think that will happen more now with this language?
You know, I think our thought process in looking at this is it gives developers another option to manage their material, and that more options are better than fewer options. And so I can't, you know, we've heard a lot of concern by the development community. We haven't heard a whole lot of a clamoring for a particular option, right? So I'm hopeful that this opens the door to more flexible management, but I don't know that it's the solution, like a silver bullet solution to this.
But at lower cost too, because one of the complaints we've had, not only, I mean, this is a huge cost burden to some of these projects to schlep it, and the cost is mostly in taking it up to Coventry.
Sure.
And so what this provides is not only flexibility, but a place to take more locally and hopefully reduce costs.
Correct. My understanding is that the driver on costs in managing these is the transportation.
Right, that's what we had testimony about.
It won't be free though, just.
No, but it's also filling up a landfill that has finite space.
Right, exactly. And this would be creating some options closer by at lower cost to developers.
Can I ask, are developers asking for one of the alternatives to have more flexibility to leave the soil on site?
So they can leave soil on site today. Most of the challenges where there's sort of a pinch, right, is where you have just an urban site that's space confined, and they're like digging a garage underneath the building in downtown Burlington. They don't have any place to put soil, or any urban area, right? So this hopefully gives them an alternative rather than taking that soil, trucking it a long distance, finding a more nearby site to manage that material. So.
Do you remember the dirt pile at the New North End Hannaford's in Burlington that was there for?
That's how development soils started in the
Yeah.
first place.
Okay.
Poster child. for
That
it, right?
will not happen?
So we make people people have a legal obligation to manage their soil piles.
Yeah.
In a reasonable period of time, and when they don't, there's an enforcement action against them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's typically what's happened in the cases where we have an extended period where someone decides to stockpile soil and not appropriately manage it.
Okay. Do you foresee A&R working collaboratively with areas of Chittenden County that might be good sites for insignificant waste event designation?
I mean, I'm certainly happy to work with sort of municipal and public entities to try and help create some access. We normally probably wouldn't reach out to private entities to try and seek sort of willing participants.
Have any reached out to you?
No.
Okay.
But we reached out to you to come up with this as a compromise and as an addition, and to add more flexibility and reduce costs, hopefully.
Yes.
Right. So I'm hopeful we will keep this language. I think it takes us a step in the right direction, and we're gonna see how many people take advantage of it and look at it, and hopefully this will improve things.
I'm hoping Matt knows if this is identical to what's in S-133.
I will look.
Can you please
S-133
I think the answer is yes, but I'll look right
Okay.
now.
Right, and this is in front of us, and I think this moves the needle in the right direction. And it is in part what we've asked for, and we asked A&R to come to the table and help us improve this, and they have. So I support our language we passed, and I would hope that the committee would continue to support the work in both brownfields and developmental soils that we have passed.
I mean, you've already passed this item.
Yeah, right, exactly. Thank you. Perfect. Casey, you get all your questions answered?
Well, yeah, I want someone on the record to say that it is not more limited in any way than what was discussed and put into S-133.
Which bill is S-133?
It's a housing and land use bill that's for
Right.
natural resources.
Is that being taken up and is there any hope that that will be addressed?
This year or next year, but
Yeah.
in the meantime, I didn't want to set up one standard for a certain type of property and not apply this to all types. That's why I want to make sure the language is identical.
And if so, this is an improvement. This is an improvement and a step forward.
So I can say, Senator, on the record, this language is the exact same.
Okay, thank you.
Great, that's what we needed to hear. Great, so with that, I would hope we would continue to be okay with these sections, and its section in the new bill.
There's one distinction, that your bill, the existing 127-479, has a report back on the management of development space, how it's being done.
Right, which we want to know. I would assume A&R would want to know that.
That's the only difference.
Right. So,
Thank you.
great, thank you, that's helpful. Terrific. So I think with that committee, we are going to, let's return to, I have asked Heidi to find out and talk, so we can talk to Scott Campbell again, possibly.
Yeah, he's available.
Is he available now?
I don't know, I asked about noon.
Okay, I did. Would he be willing to Zoom in with us? Do people want a 5-minute break or because we're gonna try and get Scott Campbell in. So let's come back at 11:45. Is that okay?